Reading 62 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Maurice Nicoll, Volume 2. Berlip, February 24th, 1945. Commentary on the meaning of aim in the work. The idea of help in the work is difficult to understand. At certain moments, we are helped by life when things go well with us. In connection with this idea of help, O once said to us long ago, "Life is too easy for you all." I think he meant that we did not understand what help in the work sense meant. When life is difficult, we usually feel in some way offended or depressed. Then the help of life is withdrawn from us. We feel upset. Things are not going rightly according to our form of expectancy of life, of how we expect life should go according to our imagination of it. In that case, we are a function of life, of external circumstances. This is one meaning of the work phrase. We are machines driven by life. But the work is not exactly about this mechanical relation to life. It is not about the mechanical stability or balance that we have in life, but about a new balance that can only be created by work on ourselves. This idea of the work is very difficult to grasp for a long time. I often think we none of us grasp it deeply enough. Have you got something in you that can resist the ups and downs of life, or are you simply a creature of external circumstances? It is fairly evident that the work is teaching us a new way of balancing ourselves, when, for instance, it says we must not identify as much as we do, which means that we must not take life as it presents itself to us by its ever-changing events. Now, supposing you identify very much when things are good and when things are bad. You feel very excited when things are good and depressed when things are bad. Then you are a function of life, a machine in the work sense. You are simply in the sea going up and down with the sea, and you have no boat to sail and direct in the way you wish to go in spite of the weather. Supposing I find that external events do not please me very much, and I begin to object to this and that. Then, supposing it occurs to me that this is an occasion when I should work on myself, and that I should not express my negative emotions, and that I should be very careful and not react mechanically in the light of all I have been taught in the work. You will agree with me that here a new set of ideas comes in, namely, the ideas taught by the work. In that case, I will begin to apply the work ideas to myself, and to a small extent will cease to be a machine, a mechanism driven by life and its external, ever-changing events. Supposing I do this once, then it will be easier for me to do it again when more or less the same circumstances arise. This is tasting the work and its quality. But if I never taste the work in this way, nor its quality, and expect merely that because I hear the work, everything is going to be better for me henceforth, then I have a very naive idea of what the work means. To think that the work is going to make everything immediately better for me is a very superficial conception of it, a very superficial conception of esotericism and its teaching. Because the object of esoteric teaching is to produce a profound change in the person one is, a profound change in the level of being. There are many things in this work that you cannot understand with your head, but only with your heart. It takes two centers to understand anything. You may work very hard on the formatory side of the work and try to work out each idea endlessly in formatory language. And while this is not entirely wasted, it is absolutely necessary to have a practical feeling about what the ideas mean, an emotional perception of the truth of the work. You may talk and write a long time about what identifying means without any emotional perception of its meaning. Or you may have many thoughts about what lying means, and yet never emotionally perceive what it means. This is because you have not applied this perception to yourself and have not seen lying or insincerity or whatever it is as an absolute fact. Now tonight I wish to speak about aim once more. You can never make aim unless you see what the work is about, namely about yourself and your relationship to higher centers, or real conscience. All aim in the work must be connected with the work. Work on yourself first of all, work with others, and with the whole meaning of esotericism, the work itself. You should start with the first line of work in connection with aim. Let me ask you this question. Where do you think you should work on yourself in connection with the ideas of the work? Have you yet got some fairly clear conception of your life and what you should try to change in your life in view of what you have been taught? Unless you start here at this place, you will never have an aim of any practical use in regard to yourself. What is it that you think you ought to change in yourself? Now this question is very interesting, and I want to dwell on it for some time. You may, from acquired conscience, from buffers, from pretenses, from false personality, have an idea that you should change something or other. What I want to point out is that if you are guided by your acquired ideas and opinions, you are following the wrong mentor. You must start from what the work teaches, because the work replaces real conscience for us as we are. It teaches what real conscience would teach us if it were awakened in us. By having our own ideas of what we ought to do or be like or aim at, we are bound to go wrong from the point of view of the work, because we are acting from our own ordinary knowledge and not from the work knowledge. We will then interfere with the action of the work on us and submit ourselves to all sorts of useless privations and endeavors. Real knowledge is quite different from what we call knowledge. Esoteric knowledge is a special knowledge that we have to learn and gradually understand through an emotional development, which gives us an emotional perception of its meaning. All this has to do with what kinds of effort are required to change our being. Our ordinary ideas, our ordinary knowledge will not change our being, and probably will only increase our fixity in our present state of being. If you think that you know already, then you will not take the knowledge of this work seriously. If you are quite sure you know what is right and wrong, you will not be able to change. A person must awaken eventually to the authority of the work and must begin to view himself in the light of what it says. You may think, for example, that many of your negative emotions are correct, and you will not call them negative emotions. Yet, the work teaches that all negative emotions are wrong, no matter what causes them. The work does not look at the causes of negative emotions, but at the fact that you are negative. On one occasion, O said, "Why do you always try to explain your negative emotions by the causes that gave rise to them? The whole point is that you are negative, and that is what you have to work on." Now, you all know how negative emotions prevent all development and make it impossible for the emotional center to communicate with higher centers. If we could communicate with higher emotional center, for example, our lives would be utterly different. We would find an entirely new set of rules whereby to live, all far more subtle than those which we follow in life. We would find, for example, that where we always take a situation in one way, there are 100 or 1,000 ways, all quite different, and that there is no stereotyped way of taking the events of life. This is one of the greatest things to understand in connection with aim and in connection with how we behave. We behave in a rigid, stereotyped way, and so we tend to make rigid, stereotyped aims. There is a certain gaiety in realizing we need not take things always in the same way. But before we can reach this beginning of inner freedom, we must realize that life is events, and notice how we react mechanically to each of the different events in life. Looking out through our limited senses, we see life as a number of objects, but we cannot see it as changing events. I often think that this is one of the first difficulties we have in understanding what the work is about. We cannot see events because they can only be mentally and emotionally realized. For example, we can see a table, a chair, a tree, a person. These objects are not events, necessarily, but supposing the tree falls on the table and kills a person at it, sitting, and smashes the chair, that is an event. All these physical objects, which are not events, are suddenly related in one event. A person is not an event, but merely an object. But supposing you hate this person when you see him, it makes an event. Events gather together objects into a certain relationship. A table by itself is not an event, but if breakfast is laid on it, it participates in an event for you. And if the egg is not boiled properly, it becomes a negative event. A whirlwind that suddenly lifts off the roofs of houses is an event, but if you stare at the roof, it is not an event. A thing that you have in your possession to look at sometimes, such as a gold watch, is not an event but an object. But if it is stolen, it becomes an event. You get up in the morning and stub your toe on the carpet, and then the carpet becomes an event. In other words, an event is something that relates a number of objects together in a certain way. This is a very inadequate description of events, but you must try to see what is meant. It is towards these events that we must try to acquire a conscious behavior. That is to say, we have to see our lives as events and not objects, because it is very easy to stare at everything, like horses and trees, and not understand that unless they are related to you in some way, they do not constitute an event. This is getting off the purely sensual level and noticing that objects are not events. Now, in making this connection with the first line of work, you should be able to observe events to which you react in a particular way, because it is in your reactions to life as events that your personal work lies for a long time, in the way you take events happening in the world of external objects. If you cannot understand the difference between objects and events, you should think of what is happening in this war. How in the event of war, all kinds of objects are regrouped, and how in another event they would be grouped quite differently. For example, millions of people are abroad who were formerly at home. The objects are the same, but they are related quite differently through the event of war. We find it very difficult to believe in events as distinct from objects. For example, we find it difficult to believe that we ourselves may be next moment in a violent temper because of some event in which we are included. We do not see that an event has happened. Actually, a triad of forces has suddenly acted on us, and we have been incorporated into it as by a whirlwind, in which different eyes have charge of us, as long as the event lasts. After the event has passed, we wonder what has happened because all the objects around us are as before. But while the event lasted, they conducted different forces within which we were included. Now, when we make aim, we always neglect events. We do not take into consideration how difficult it will be to keep that aim in view of the different events that may happen to us. We expect a tranquil sea on which we can steer a direct course. Therefore, when our aim is very superficial and momentary, formed in a moment of enthusiasm, we find that it is absolutely useless and leads nowhere. However, instead of becoming offended and beginning to blame the work, we should begin to understand what it means to be sly man or wise man, wise really meaning clever. You will remember that the wise virgins were not wise but clever, And this word in the Gospels means clever or mentally awake, is the same as the word sly used in the work. A superficial aim will lead nowhere, especially if it is from acquired conscience, which has behind it merit, vanity. Those aims turned towards external life are of no use in the work. They do not touch the esoteric level, that is, the level of real conscience. To begin to have a real aim, you must already know that you cannot keep it, and as it were, not tell yourself what this real aim is. Real aim comes from something deeper in you, something emotional. As it is said in Matthew, "Let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth." In the language of parables, left is the weak side, the personality, and right means the deeper and more real side of you. Now, if you make an aim with your left hand and tell yourself you will get some advantage from it, some merit, some praise from other people, that you will be better thought of, even in the work, you will not be doing it from your right hand or your real side. For this reason, real aim must always be something you never quite put into words and let your false personality know about, and you must not expect to attain its object right away. You will have, in fact, probably to follow a devious and apparently contradictory path to fulfill real aim, and above all, you must not think that because things go wrong, your aim is useless. But the most important thing to understand is that in real aim you cannot go directly toward it, but like a sailing ship at sea, which endeavors to sail to a certain goal, you must tack one way and then another way, according to the wind. Now, a real aim depends on an emotional perception of something you dislike in yourself and which you wish to change eventually. It depends on a certain integrity of feeling that persists in spite of downfalls. Thus, great patience is necessary in connection with real aim. A formatory aim is quite different from real aim, and although you begin with formatory aims, you must realize they cannot be kept, and so must admit you cannot do in this sense. Real aim can only arise from long observation and real evaluation of the work, because unless the presence of the work is constantly with real aim, unless you rely on the work as well as yourself to keep it, it can lead nowhere except into false personality and the feeling of merit. Real aim always nourishes you, nourishes your understanding, and then you see how it can change and yet remain the same, how it can tack from one side to the other and never go in the direct way which our natural impatience demands, because all real aim is connected with our own self-development, with the development of essence in us, with the development of understanding in us, which is the greatest force we can create. Whereas false aim cannot develop our understanding, and very often simply contracts us and turns us into Puritans, as it were, into a rigid keeping of some little internal decision. You can do nothing by suddenly cutting yourself off from what you have been by some arbitrary act. It is only by modification and transformation that you can change your life. When you have real aim, you see the difficulties of keeping it. When you make a little formatory aim, it is quite different. We are told to make aims with the object of seeing that we cannot keep them, so that we can see second force or force of resistance. But when we come to make real aim, we are more aware of second force and the difficulties that will stand in the way of our keeping this aim. I would like to say here that real aim is a silent aim, something that you never tell anyone else, or even tell yourself in so many words. And this kind of aim is of such a quality that you are not dismayed by the constant apparent breaking of it, or the contradictions that arise in connection with it when apparently you are going in a different direction from what you intended. I have given you the image of a sailing ship setting out to cross the Atlantic from east to west, let us say, and probably this ship cannot ever really go directly to the west, but must go northwest, southwest, and even occasionally in the reverse direction for the time being. Yet, at the same time, if it keeps to its aim, it will eventually get where it intended. It does not lose hope. It does not despair, because there is a certain deep intention of getting eventually where it wants to go. Now, what do you think real aim is, as distinct from artificial aim? As I said, real aim can only spring out of long observation and real valuation of the work. There is a phrase that O used to use. The work will find a way for you. This is a very good phrase to remember, but it demands that you have a constant relationship to the work, in your soul, in your depths. It is the work that changes us, because the work brings us a little closer, little by little, to higher centers, which are always telling us what to do and how to live our real lives, and which we cannot hear owing to the traffic of life in the mechanical parts of centers. The great aim was given in the Gospels: seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. Seek another actual level of being promised to us both by the Gospels and by this work. I remember again another phrase that G sometimes used: I can work, which can help you, especially when you feel defeated by having to tack north or south. But if you ask me to define what real aim is, I leave it to you. We have to make an aim. We do not know exactly what our next step in development is, but if the aim we make is sufficiently genuine, the influences of the work will greatly modify it in the right direction. And here you will be astonished how different what you thought you had to do is from what you have to do. And also you will be astonished to find how much help comes to you as long as you do not throw up your hands in despair. But if you will the work, if you have goodwill to it, if your idea of good begins to be connected with esoteric teaching, then you will be sure of getting a response that is right, even though the request is wrong, provided the request is sincere. Remember that we cannot use this work for life as our primary object, but we can use life for the work. It is difficult to see what this means because we do not realize what is first in us. If we could make the work first, then everything else would be added to us, and we would find what really belongs to us in life and what does not belong to us. But this state would be like something that is passive becoming active, and something active becoming passive. It would mean that we begin to live the work in life. For this reason, we should connect everything we do in life with the work, even artificially at first. This is called, as far as I remember it, doing everything in the name of God. You should not do the work for a short time and then pass out of it and come under life as an antithesis. You should try, even artificially, to act so that whatever you do in life has some connection with the work, and not make the work the opposite to life. G once said, "Bring all things into the work. Do not go into life as a relaxation from the work, but connect your relaxation in life with the work." This may sound strange, and yet it contains a very important idea. Some people will say, if I am negative, it is in the work. Yes, of course it is. If you speak against the work, remember it is in the work. If you go off the deep end in some way or other, remember it is in the work. If you are in the work, whatever you do, is in the work. If you cannot feel this, you will divide yourself into life eyes and work eyes, which will appear to be at enmity with each other. If you are in the work, you cannot be out of it, whatever eye acts in you. So do not make this opposition between work and life. And remember that the work is not exactly ignorant of human nature. All that you do from the point of view of this not having anything to do with the work, and all that you do from the idea of its being connected with the work, is all in the work. You cannot live now in the work and now in life, because that will make a split in you. The idea of balanced man is that he includes everything, but in the right place, in the right order, in the right arrangement. Remember that even the bad animals were taken into Noah's Ark and included in the whole thing. No one can develop without this bad side. No one can simply be good without the power of being bad. It is a question of right arrangement, right order, right balance. Even eyes that are not in the work are useful and are in the work, if you understand what I mean. How, unless we had many doubts, could we have any strength? How, unless we are continually tempted in the work, could we reach any new level of understanding? Even negative eyes are useful, provided we know how not to identify with them. Considering all these things, you will see how real aim, which has to take into consideration second force, and has to be made cleverly, or by means of sly man in oneself, is not quite what we expect and will not instantly bring beautiful rewards to us, beautiful, instantaneous results. We may map a course out as a mariner does, but the master of a sailing ship does not expect to go directly to his goal, although he intends to do so in spite of all weathers, all contrary winds. I would like you all to think what real aim is, in contrast to temporary, but quite useful aim, and unless you have an idea of a higher level of humanity, the conscious circle of humanity, a far better state of humanity than we see on this earth, then it will be difficult to make real aim. All the concepts and ideas of the work are necessary to make real aim, and one thing above all others is necessary, that we are dissatisfied with our level of being and feel that there is the possibility of change. Now, to recapitulate. Real aim must be based on long observation of oneself and what the work teaches about how to reach a higher level of being. The first difficulty is that we do not remember ourselves, that we are not conscious. We do not drive our own carriage, but are in a public house drunk with our imagination. Then follows the teaching of identifying, of how we are many and not one, how we say I as if it meant anything, how we are full of inner accounts, full of internal considering, of how we lie, how we spend our force in self-justifying, in pretending to be what we are not, how we are full of pictures of ourselves which have nothing to do with our real selves, how we react to attitudes, how we speak from acquired opinions and never think for ourselves, how imagination creeps into everything we do or say or feel, how we are fast asleep in life but are carried along by mechanical reactions, how we are creatures of mental, emotional, and physical habit, how we never see and attack our own ignorance, how we never take in new impressions about anything, how we are governed by vanity and pride and self-complacency, and finally, how we are not awake but so asleep and hypnotized that we follow every event of life and make no inner stand against it. And there are many other things that the work teaches we have to observe and see the truth about. And then we have to understand that we cannot start from all this, that we cannot add the work to all the mess in ourselves, but we have to go down and realize we cannot do. Realize how ignorant we really are, how much we say all day long that has no meaning, how we react to things and think we are actually conscious, all of which leads to the realization of our mechanicalness, the realization that we do not exist at all, save as puppets jerked by strings. Now how can such a puppet make an aim, save to be a greater puppet? If a puppet makes an aim, it will be mere puppetry. The puppet thinks he knows how to make an aim. Standing over this puppet is the work, which tells us what kind of aim to make, and you can be sure that this aim is always against this puppet. Now, all real aim is psychological. Remember, we live in a psychological world of thoughts and feelings and desires. This psychological world is extraordinarily complex and marvelous. It has all sorts of combinations and patterns, wrong arrangements and right arrangements. All the work teaches at first is about getting this psychological world into a right arrangement. Suppose you are full of hate towards someone and you try to get your psychological world right. Is it not impossible? Do you all understand that you live in a psychological world and not in a physical world, and that you react to the events in the physical world psychologically, save when the physical world blows you up physically? The work is to get the psychological world rightly adjusted so that it transmit higher centers. We may in life conceal our psychological thoughts and feelings, but the work is another force, not of life, and from that we can conceal nothing that is psychological. Real aim has to do with the psychological world and how we handle others and ourselves in it. In this world, we have to make entirely new associations, an entirely new pattern. The object of the work is to make this new pattern in the brain, to think in a new way, not as everybody thinks, who is poised in life. Unless you think about the work and what it means, unless you see esotericism and its aim, unless you understand that man is a self-developing organism and can only develop by an entirely new kind of thought, then no new patterns are made in the brain, and so all the undeveloped part of the brain is unused, that part that can connect with higher centers. If you take things as you have always taken them, nothing new can come from itself. Nothing new can form itself. But if you take life from what the work teaches and take yourself in a new way, you will make a new pattern, new associations in the frontal lobes, if you like, and these will connect with higher centers. If your aim is right, this will happen gradually, but if your aim is a life aim, a purely ambitious aim, you will not form any new patterns, but just ordinary, commonplace ones. That is why I said that a real aim nourishes your understanding of the work, and a purely life aim does not. But if you include a life aim in a work aim, then the case is different. Then new associations can be made, and through new associations a new feeling of oneself is created. In fact, through a new set of associations, one feels oneself a quite different person. One becomes psychologically a different person, provided one can die to the old associations. It is always interesting to reflect that higher centers are always trying to change us. We are self-developing organisms in the sight of higher centers. Contact with them can only develop us in the right way, because everybody has created a different self-developing organism with his own destiny. The object of this work is to put us in touch with higher centers. From this point of view, it is interesting to reflect how we think we can develop ourselves from our own ideas of what development means, and how different the influences of higher centers may be. We think we must go along this line, but from the standpoint of higher centers, we may be going in quite the wrong direction. For this reason, we have to start with the work as an aim, because it is given by conscious humanity, people who have reached higher centers. One thing can be said here, that we always have to develop in the direction of our own most inferior functions, our most unused side, the most despised side of ourselves, and not along the line of what we are best at. Remember, we have to become balanced. If you can think well, you have to feel more. If you feel too much, you have to think more, and so on.